One of the most important cases ever tried in the United States was heard in this St. Louis Old Courthouse. The Supreme Court decided in the case in 1857, a decision that would hasten the start of the Civil War. Central to this case in 1857 was Dred Scott. The case was heard and led by staunch slavery proponent Justice Roger B. Taney, who ruled that Dred Scott, as an African American, was not a United States citizen and had no right to sue for his freedom. This decision nullified the Missouri Compromise of 1820, which was legislation that restricted slavery in certain territories, as being unconstitutional, and contributed to sectional strife in the 1850s, and, as was mentioned, propelled the nation into civil war. When the case began in 1847, Dred Scott was about 50 years old. He was born in Virginia in 1799, and was the property, as his parents had been, of Peter Blow. He had spent his entire life as a slave and was illiterate. Dred Scott moved to St. Louis with the Blows in 1830, but was soon sold due to his master's financial problems. He was purchased by Dr. John Emerson, a military surgeon stationed at the Jefferson Barracks, and Scott accompanied him to posts in Illinois and in the Wisconsin Territory, where slavery had been prohibited by the Missouri Compromise of 1820. Dred Scott would later marry Harriet Robinson, also a slave, at Fort Snelling. They would have two children, Eliza and Lizzie. John Emerson married Irene Sanford during a brief stay in Louisiana. In 1842, the Scotts returned with Dr. and Mrs. Emerson to St. Louis. John Emerson died in 1843, and it is believed that Mrs. Emerson hired out Dred Scott, Harriet, and their children to work for other families. On April 6, 1846, Dred Scott and his wife Harriet filed for suit against Irene Emerson for their freedom. For almost 9 years, Scott had lived in a free territory, yet made no attempt to end his servitude. No one knows exactly why he chose this particular time for the suit, although historians have considered possibilities, one of which is that he may have been dissatisfied with being hired out by Mrs. Emerson. Another may have been that Mrs. Emerson might have been planning to sell him. Or he may have even offered to buy his own freedom and might have been refused this privilege. It is known that the suit was not brought for political purposes. It is thought that friends in St. Louis who opposed slavery had encouraged Scott to sue for his freedom on the grounds that he once lived in a free territory. In the past, Missouri courts supported the doctrine of once free, always free. Dred Scott could not read or write and had no money. He needed help with his suit. John Anderson, the Scots minister, may have been influential in their decision to sue, and the Blow family, Dred's original owners, backed him financially. The support of such friends helped the Scotts through nearly 11 years of a very complicated and often very disappointing litigation. I know, as I sit here beside the grave, it is hard to understand. But under the law of 1846, whether or not the Scots were entitled to their freedom was not as important as the consideration of property rights. If slaves were indeed valuable property, like a car, or an expensive home, or some other known property as we know it to be today, could they have been taken away from their owners because of where the owner had taken them? Imagine for a moment. You took your car and drove it across to Illinois, a car that you legally owned in Missouri, and while in Illinois, You were now told that this car was no longer yours and can be taken away from you. Basically, these were the questions that were being discussed in the Scott case, with just one major issue. It's not a car, it's a human being. Back then, very few whites considered the human factor in the Dred Scott case. Today, however, we acknowledge that it is wrong to hold people against their will and force them to work as they once did in the days of slavery.